The fighting had moved through 2 days ago. Private Roy Daniels was part of the cleanup crew, going through the field, checking bodies, marking positions, cataloging what was left when the battle moved on. He almost didn't check the Foxhole. It was just a hole in the ground, like dozens of others across the field. Standard defensive position. The kind men dug when they had 20 minutes and a rifle and the knowledge that something bad was coming. But this one had sounds coming from it. Daniel stopped. He raised his rifle, called out. 2 voices answered, one in English, one in German. He looked in. 2 men, side by side in a hole barely wide enough for one. An American in olive drab, left shoulder bandaged with a strip torn from his own jacket. A German in field gray, right leg wrapped in a makeshift splint made from a broken rifle stock and bootlaces. Both of them looking up at Daniels. Both of them alive. The American said, "Hey." "Took you long enough." The German said nothing. He was watching Daniel's rifle. Daniel stared at them for a long moment. Then he called for his sergeant. His sergeant called for the medics. The medics called for the intelligence officer. The intelligence officer called for the commanding officer. By evening, the report was on its way up the chain. By the following morning, it was on Patton's desk. This is the story of what happened in that foxhole, and what Patton said when he found out. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe. We tell the World War II stories that show what happens when the war becomes smaller than 2 men trying to stay alive. The American's name was Private First Class Eddie Kowalski, 22 years old, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He had been with his unit for 6 months, from the Rhine crossing through the push toward Cologne. The German's name was Gefreiter Franz Meyer, 26 years old, from a small town outside Stuttgart. He had been in the field since 1942, 3 years of it. He was one of the last men still fighting. Not because he believed anything, but because stopping had never been an option anyone offered him. They had tried to kill each other on the morning of March 14th. Kowalski's unit had been pushing through a tree line when they took fire from a German defensive position. In the exchange, Kowalski had taken a hit to the left shoulder. Not fatal, but serious enough to drop him. He had crawled for cover, found the nearest depression in the ground, and rolled into it. The nearest depression in the ground was already occupied. Meyer had been in that foxhole for 6 hours watching the American advance, waiting for orders that hadn't come because his unit had already withdrawn and nobody had told him. He was out of ammunition. He had a sprained ankle from a fall 2 days earlier and a fever he'd been ignoring. He had watched Kowalski fall and crawl toward him. He had watched Kowalski roll into the foxhole. They had looked at each other from a distance of approximately 18 inches. Neither of them had a weapon ready. Kowalski's rifle was somewhere behind him in the field. Meyer's was empty. For approximately 10 seconds, nothing happened. Then Kowalski said, in the universal language of a man who has just been shot, "I need help with this." He was trying to reach the wound on his left shoulder with his right hand and couldn't get the angle. Meyer looked at him. He didn't speak English, but the gesture was clear. He reached over and pressed his hand against the wound. That was how it started. They spent 3 days in that foxhole. The intelligence officer who interviewed them afterward wrote a detailed report of what they described. The report was unusual in that it read less like a military document and more like something else entirely. Kowalski had a field dressing in his jacket pocket. Meyer found it and applied it. His hands were practiced. 3 years of watching men get hurt had taught him things no training manual covered. Meyer's ankle was swollen and hot. Kowalski, with his good arm, helped him wrap it tighter with strips from his own jacket lining. They had between them half a canteen of water, 1 ration tin of cold beans that Kowalski had been carrying, and 4 cigarettes. They divided everything equally, without discussion, without negotiation, without anything that required language. Day 1, they stayed at opposite ends of the Foxhole, watching each other, saying nothing. Night 1, the temperature dropped. They moved closer without either of them deciding to. Warmth was warmth. The logic of survival was simpler than either of them had been trained to think. Day 2, Kowalski tried to teach Mayer the English word for water. Mayer tried to teach Kowalski the German word for the same thing. They spent approximately 30 minutes on this. By the end, they could both say both words. They found this unreasonably funny. Neither of them could have explained why. But they laughed briefly in the bottom of a hole in a field in Germany in March 1945. And for a moment, the field didn't exist. Day 2 night, Mayer's fever spiked. Kowalski used the last of the water to wet a strip of cloth and put it on his forehead. He had seen his mother do this. He didn't know if it worked. He did it anyway. Day 3, Mayer's fever broke. Kowalski's shoulder had stopped bleeding properly, which was bad. He was pale and getting paler. He couldn't lift his left arm. Mayer redressed the wound with what was left of their cloth. He kept pressure on it for 2 hours, not moving, while Kowalski drifted in and out of sleep. On the morning of Day 3, Daniels looked into the Foxhole. Both men were evacuated to the field medical station, treated, stabilized. Then the question became what to do next. Kowalski went to the American medical tent. Mayer went to the prisoner processing area. They did not see each other again for 6 weeks. The intelligence officer, Lieutenant Cole, interviewed them separately. He asked each of them the same questions. He wrote both reports and then he read them together and found something that struck him as significant. He had asked each of them, "At any point in 3 days, did you consider trying to harm the other man?" Kowalski had said, "The first day, maybe. For a few minutes." Then he put his hand on my shoulder and I stopped thinking about it. Mayer had said through the translator, "The first day, yes. When he came into the hole, I thought about it. Then I saw the wound and I couldn't. After you stop someone's bleeding, you can't hurt them. That's just how it is." Cole wrote both answers in the same report and underlined them. Then he sent the report to Patton. Patton read the report on a Tuesday morning. He read it twice. He set it down and looked out the window for a while. Then he called for Cole. Cole arrived within the hour. He had been expecting the call. Patton said, "Tell me about them." Cole told him what he knew. The 2 men, the Foxhole, the 3 days. The water divided equally, the fever, the shoulder, the cigarettes shared in halves. Patton said, "Kowalski is in our medical tent." Cole said, "Yes, sir. He'll be fit for reassignment in about 2 weeks. Patton said, "And Mayer is in the prisoner processing area." Cole said, "Yes, sir." Patton said, "Are they aware of each other's status?" Cole said, "They haven't been in contact since the evacuation, sir." Patton was quiet for a moment. He said, "Set up a meeting." Cole looked at him. He said, "Sir?" Patton said, "Before Mayer is transferred to the main prisoner facility, set up a meeting between them. 1 hour, a translator present. I want them to be able to finish a conversation that got interrupted." Cole said, "Sir, the regulations regarding prisoner contact." Patton said, "I know the regulations. I'm authorizing an exception. 1 meeting, 1 hour. Document it properly. Then process Mayer through the normal pipeline." Cole said, "Yes, sir. May I ask why?" Patton looked at him. He said, "Because those 2 men spent 3 days keeping each other alive in a hole in the ground. That's not nothing. You don't just process that through intake and move on. You let them say whatever they need to say and then you move on." Cole said, "What if they don't have anything to say?" Patton said, "Then they sit in a room for an hour and that's still more than they'd get otherwise." He picked up the next report. Cole went to arrange the meeting. The meeting took place on a Thursday afternoon in a small room in the field medical building. Cole was present with a translator, a German-American corporal named Fisher. Kowalski arrived first. His left arm was in a sling. He sat down at the plain table and waited. Meyer was brought in a few minutes later. He walked with a slight limp. He saw Kowalski and stopped for a moment in the doorway. Then he walked in and sat down. They looked at each other across the table. Fisher waited. For almost a full minute, neither man spoke. Then Kowalski said, "How's the ankle?" Fisher translated. Meyer looked down at his foot. Then he said something. Fisher said, "He says it's better. He says he's been walking on it." Kowalski nodded. He said, "Good." Another silence. Then Meyer said something unprompted. Fisher translated, and he said, "He wants to know if the shoulder healed correctly. He says he was worried he wrapped it wrong." Kowalski looked at his sling. He said, "Doctors say it'll be fine. A few more weeks." Fisher translated. Meyer nodded. Meyer said something else. Fisher translated. He says he's glad. They sat with that for a moment. Then Kowalski said, "The water. When you split the water on day 2, we had half a canteen left and you split it exactly." "I've been thinking about that." Fisher translated. Meyer listened. Then he said something. Fisher translated. He says it wasn't a decision. He says it was just obvious. You don't take more than half. Kowalski said, "Where I'm from, some people do." Fisher translated. Meyer smiled slightly. He said something. Fisher translated. He says where he's from too. They sat with that for a long time. Cole, standing near the wall, wrote in his notes that the room had a quality he found difficult to describe. It was not tense. It was not emotional in any dramatic sense. It was just two men sitting across a table accounting for 3 days that had happened to both of them, making sure the other one was all right. The hour ended. Meyer was processed to the main prisoner facility the following morning. He was repatriated to Germany in late 1945. Kowalski returned to his unit, completed his service, and went home to Pittsburgh in July 1945. They never met again. In 1972, a journalist working on a series about ordinary soldiers found both of them through veterans' records and war archives. Kowalski was working in a steel mill. Meyer was a carpenter in Stuttgart. The journalist asked each of them separately about the Foxhole. Kowalski said, "I think about it more than most things from the war, not because it was dramatic, because it wasn't. It was just two guys in a hole figuring out the minimum required to keep each other alive, and the minimum turned out to be more than either of us expected." Meyer said through a translator, 3 years of fighting, all the things I saw and did. And what I remember clearest is sitting in that hole watching someone who was supposed to be my enemy and thinking, he's cold and he's hurt and so am I. That's all it was. We were the same temperature. The journalist asked Kowalski, "Do you think about Meyer?" Kowalski said, "Sometimes I hope he's all right." The journalist found Meyer a week later and told him that. Meyer was quiet for a moment. Then he said something through the translator. He said, "Tell him the ankle is fine." Patton never mentioned the Foxhole publicly, but Cole's report, filed and archived, included a final note at the bottom that was unusual for a military document. He wrote, "I have processed hundreds of prisoner interviews. I have documented dozens of unusual field situations. I have written reports about courage, cowardice, ingenuity, and failure. This is the only report I have written that is entirely about two men being cold at the same time." He wrote, "Patton authorized a meeting between them. 1 hour. Before I arranged it, I asked him why it mattered. He said, because they did something harder than fighting." They stopped. He said, "Anybody can be trained to fight. You practice it. You drill it. You build it into muscle memory. Stopping is different. Stopping requires you to see something the training specifically tells you not to see." He said, "They saw it. In a hole in the ground in March with half a canteen of water and a fever between them. They saw it." He paused and he said, That deserves an hour in a room. Would you have been able to stop? In that foxhole, with the enemy 18 inches away, what would you have done? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want more World War II stories, the ones about what happens when the war becomes smaller than two men trying to stay alive, make sure you subscribe.